It's been a long while, but you have the NFL's number one defensive tackle back in the fold. And yes, Aaron Donald, I am counting you. Hate to say it, Chris Jones signs a 1-year deal to be back in Kansas City. All of it today on Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Welcome back, friends and neighbors. Thanks for making us your first listen here on Locked On Chiefs, part of Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day, or crazy times when things explode like the Chris Jones signing that we're going to get into today. We're brought to you by Prize Picks. And the easiest and most exciting way for you to play daily fantasy sports is over there. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code, all lowercase, LockedOnNFL to get a first deposit match of up to $100 at Prize Picks. A lot to cover here today. I appreciate you guys being here. We're running a little bit late. We are live yet again. So if you have questions, we'll attempt to get to some of those later. We're going to cover for you a number of aspects today. I'm Ryan Tracy, the founder of Rogue Analytics and Performance Consulting, NFL33.com, and RGR Football. With my partner, Chris Clark, here of Chiefs Corner, we're going to run down the cap implications, everything numbers-wise, because Chris is going to give us the math. We're going to end later in the show talking about the wide receivers and what has to happen. What is the effect that Chris Jones has on the defense? We'll get to that too. But we have to start with the details on the Chris Jones deal. It is a 1 year, and it's a unique one at that, Chris. Did the details here shock you?
It shocks me that there is no – I mean, it's really no deal. It's a matter of basically incentives, and we don't know the incentives yet. The thing that really doesn't make sense to me in any of this is the only way that Kansas City can make this deal is if it's not likely to be earned incentives. Mm-hmm. And if that's truly the case, then he has to do more than he did last year in less games.
And for the Chiefs, and we're going to talk not only what this deal means, but we don't have all the dollar details yet, but it's the minutia. It's the system of this deal. And that's really intriguing because for the Chiefs, what they end up getting is whatever the dollars come out to, they get a seriously motivated Chris Jones to try and reproduce and surpass what he did last season. And that's a recipe for success in Kansas City.
It definitely is, and that's definitely something to watch. 15.5 sacks last year. So he would have to get more than that in order to earn a not likely to be earned incentives. He'd have to have 16 sacks or more in likelihood to hit that incentive. So I'm not exactly sure where the money is going to be coming from because Kansas City doesn't have the money that they can add to the salary cap at this point. It's a matter of they're going to have to restructure deals. They're going to have to restructure probably a Joe Thuney, maybe a Travis Kelce, and maybe they're going to restructure a couple of other deals to create the cap space. Because right now, if Chris Jones was to come back today, they'd be about $8 million over. Yeah. They probably need $3 or $4 million to be able to get through the season. So you're going to have to create 10 to 11, maybe $12 million, and you can't do it anywhere else. You're not getting an actual extension. This is just a redone deal for this season. And the question is, the big question and the only question that really matters in all of this, did they give up the ability to tag him?
Yeah, and that really is what it comes down to. Because from the statement that Brett Veach made, Matt Derrick had a question on the incentives and how they could be structured to actually make this work, to get yourself a little bit of breathing room, plus that 8 that we know they had to counteract. But to term it, Nate Taylor had an interesting comment as well from his sources that these negotiations are to put a multiple incentives in place that could earn a large raise. And a large raise means, I'm guessing, so that he can get back towards that 30 number that he wanted in those incentives. So that to me means that Chiefs probably pushed it up to 20 sacks or something like that, right? But in the contrast, they got that deal, and that's the number one question. If they didn't lose the ability to tag him next year, this is an absolute clean sweep for the Kansas City Chiefs as an organization.
It is. And, I mean, that's really the reality of looking at this in general. If they didn't give any cash this year, which it doesn't sound like they did, and they really can't afford to when it comes to the cap unless they're recreating that from somebody else's contract, Kansas City won this negotiation. And I know Jones said that he was willing to sit out till week 8. I think that he saw the writing on the wall and the Chiefs weren't going to move. And that's a lot of money to give up. And it also would have given up money possibly next year on a tag. Right now, we just don't know the numbers. But we do know that he's at almost, $4 million, I think we calculated, that he's lost out on so far.
Yeah, run us through that real quick in this segment so that we can get to the effect on the team.
So he lost the $500,000 workout bonus. There's no way he can get that. So that's going to be something that will be adjusted at the end of the year for the salary cap. He got a $99,000 fine basically for missing minicamp, and almost 1.1 for missing week one. But the thing that I don't disagree with on this is they're saying 1+ in fines for missing training camp. I think it's $50,000 a day. Counted it right before the show. If that's the case, that's $2.5 million.
On top of this, that represents what, 1.25. So we're talking 3 3/4 ish as a minimum of what he's missed out on his pay scale this season.
Right. And which means in order to be able to get back to just zero of where he was, he'd have to be able to hit incentives that are over $4 million almost. And like I said, it has to be not likely to be earned. So he's going to have to do something he didn't do last year in order to do it this year, in order to get those incentives this year. And considering the year he had last year, he's basically going to have to average over a sack a game in order to have a chance, because the reality is he's got 16 games to have a chance to break his sack numbers from last year. There's other numbers that you can look at as well, other things, but he already played a bunch of the snaps last season. So even that is not something that is likely to be a situation that he could get past.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. And now he only has 16 games to do it in. I know that sounds normal because we're not used to the 17-game season yet, folks, but that's just another significant step. And so in the end, in my opinion, losing that game check is what did turn the tide here. Like, hey, I got to get back in. I'm already down all this money. I hope that this means that this is a stepping stone to a further deal. We'll talk about the implications for the future and for this defense right after this. But hey, if you're not in the action, days like today will tell you that you need to get into it. So get ready for the NFL season today with an incredible deal from FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, all the new customers can save $5. Just bet $5 and you get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed no matter what. All existing customers can bet $5 and get up to $100 off of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. That's the way that I have to watch games when they're out of market. So it's worth your effort just to get that discount. Now is the best time to join FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because the app's easy to use. You can get anything you want to bet, whether it's props, spreads, game lines, whatever it is. Maybe you bet on when Chris Jones comes back into the fold. Maybe you won big today, but you can do it over at FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOnNFL. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. The NFL and all the seasons are going on. So kick off this NFL season with an offer that you don't want to miss. It's over at FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Impact is, I think, probably the bigger deal here, right? So it's not just what it does for the bottom line and cap and having maneuverability. Unless there's something earth-shattering in the numbers when we get them, I don't think it leaves a whole lot of room to grab another free agent. I talked about that a little bit earlier today. So this is going to be your pass rush. So what it does long-term, I think, is a little bit different. And in the end, if they can get a long-term deal because they were able to get to this point, if this was truly a Chiefs held out because they didn't want to budge, and that's the way that I read this, maybe that means that the representation is still going to have to come back and not tail between the legs, but not in such a position of power. I talked about a couple of weeks ago that maybe this doesn't get done until there's a significant change at the representation level for Chris Jones. Maybe that's in our future too. Could be a lot of things coming.
Well, and I wonder, and the other thing I was thinking about when you were talking about FanDuel, I wonder whether or not it's possible that Chris Jones has incentives for the playoffs. That would be one of the easiest ways potentially to get large incentives, because you're sitting here in a situation where he got 2 sacks last year. That's his entirety of his playoff career. He's only had 2 sacks. Is it possible that they said, here you go? Because you have to remember, incentives have to be something the team didn't do last year. Well, he made the Pro Bowl last year. He won the Super Bowl last year. So you're not going to be able to do something like that. Maybe Defensive Player of the Year if you want to put an incentive out there for that. But again, he's going to be doing it in 16 games, not 17 like everybody else. So big question when it comes to that. But maybe it's playoff based. But that's counting on the Chiefs making the playoffs, which I know we fully expect them to do. But you are basically taking something and assuming that they're going to do and maybe get back to the Super Bowl and maybe have stats in the Super Bowl. Maybe that's what it's going to come down to, because the sacks were only in the AFC Championship game.
Yeah.
Don't know. It's going to be interesting to see.
And we're going to get those details eventually. We don't have them, obviously, tonight. When they roll out, we'll give you an update on that. But him being motivated, I think, is the bigger takeaway for the team. Because I was really happy. I was really, really happy with the way the young guys played the other night and at least put up a fight. Was it earth-shattering? No. But you add Chris to a unit that actually held their own decently, 14 points to the Detroit Lions. And a run game that could have, I think, run for a lot more. Like, they held their own, and now you add Chris back. And then you're going to get a Menahue back in a few weeks. Like, all these things stacking up, that makes me feel a lot better about the whole thing.
No, and I think it's a good thing. It's a great reason to feel good about the whole thing. And I think that you also have to look at it from the aspect of, you're absolutely right. I mean, the defense played above what you would expect against the Detroit Lions without Chris Jones. Now, I do want to caution, I want to say a couple things really quick. I want to caution, one, he will likely be back. It sounds like they expect him to play against Jacksonville. But don't expect that he's going to be back on the roster today or tomorrow or even Wednesday or Thursday. They may wait till Saturday to move him back because he's on the exempt list right now. And it's not costing them the cap space, and that's the key. So don't be surprised if he's not on the roster this entire week and they activate him on Saturday. So that's one. But two, you mentioned this earlier, and I just want to say it because I love talking about our buddy Therese Paylor. He always said, contract season's never undefeated or never defeated. So in a way, Kansas City's got the best of both worlds in this scenario, especially since it sounds like there's no way that they put out extra cash. They're just trying to incentivize him and give him a chance at making a lot more money. And honestly, I mean, I guess if they put something out there for him to get 17 and a half sacks or, close to 20 sacks or whatever and said it's a $10 million bonus, I don't think Kansas City's going to be too upset if they have to pay that.
I don't think the organization will. One thing that I think we need to talk about is, yes, adding him to a group of young players that showed up pretty good last week is a plus. Getting a Menahue back with him is going to be another plus. But the only thing that can kind of derail that is this back and forth kind of overly dramatic thing that we saw last weekend with him here at Ronald McDonald House. And so the only thing that can derail it, in my opinion, is having a roster and a locker room that's a little bit salty about the way this whole thing went down and the fact that they now have an L that he could have helped them avoid had he just come in last week. So that's the big measurement for me is he back practicing tomorrow? And maybe they hold him out exempt, no big deal. But is the room cold to him? That's what I need to know.
No, and I get it, and that's the big question mark. I will say I don't think the room's going to be cold just because of the way that this has worked out. I'm sure that there are people that are going to be salty about having that loss, but I think the people are also probably a lot saltier about the offense not doing what they felt the job was. The defense really did what they were supposed to do and what you would want them to do. And I think you could easily make the argument, even with Chris Jones, I don't know that they really it changes the score that much. Maybe it changes it by a couple points. I don't know, but 14 points for a offense like the Detroit Lions, I don't know that it changes a ton. Now, Jared Goff would have had probably less time to throw. They wouldn't have had to blitz, so there's an argument to be made there. But the defense did its job. It's the offense that didn't, and so you can be salty, but in the end, I've talked about this a lot, and we've talked about it, and I wrote about it on Chiefs Corner. Actually, I just talked about third down and who Mahomes targeted and how often they caught the ball and the different yardage they made, and they only converted 45% of their third downs. That is something that can't continue. And they only completed 45% of their third downs. They only converted 36% because one of the throws was short of the sticks. So in that scenario, offense let them down. I mean, that's just the reality of it.
Yeah. And right now we're talking about the defense and what the effect is going to be. It raises the whole tide. Obviously, there's issues on offense. We're going to talk about the wide receivers here in a minute. But raising everything by having Chris Jones back, and we know he's kind of a jovial guy. Do you think that it has an effect now that maybe that takes some of the pressure off that offensive side of the ball now to have the better pass rush?
It could, but the other side of it, though, when you start looking at this situation for Chris Jones is we don't know how many snaps he's going to be able to play. He says he's going to be able to go in and play. And I will tell you this right now, if he plays more than 50% of the snaps, I'm going to be pissed. You can say that he should be playing a lot because they're paying him a ton of money, and I get it. But he doesn't deserve to be playing 50% of the snaps after just coming back and not having played football at all over the offseason.
Well, we don't even know if he's capable of that. So I guess we're just going to have to see. But coming up next, what does that offensive side look like now that maybe they got a little bit of breathing room? How do they deal with the wide receiver room? That's coming up next.
Testing my skills on Prize Picks this football season is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Prize Picks is really simple to play. I can make my picks and submit my entry in less than 60 seconds. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what makes Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Prize Picks offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday each Tuesday. Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. One more time, prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Daily fantasy sports made easy.
And I need fantasy sports made easy, I got to tell you. It always helps me to have that. Prize Picks is a great way to get there. But picking who's going to be an effective pass catcher on this roster was already a conundrum before we got into the week one. Now it's even worse. Now it's more of a question mark. And I've been spinning this around in my head as we've gone through the last 36 hours, just trying to come up with what I hope to see versus what we will see. And when it comes to those wide receivers, there's all this talent in the room. They kept 7 wide receivers because of how much talent they have. I have to feel, especially after Andy Reid's comments today, that maybe it was a preparation factor. Maybe it was expecting too much from Kadarius Toney in particular, but also from Richie James. Andy Reid acknowledged some things that they have to fix, but it is with those two guys in particular that I think we can probably look at in terms of performance that has to be changed. And then we can talk about scheme. Which do you think is more important?
Well, I will say that I love that Andy Reid is defending his players like he is, coming out and defending Kadarius Toney like he is. And I will also say I fully expect that Kansas City is going to have at least 1 or 2 plays designed for Kadarius Toney in the first quarter just to try to get him involved and get him going. I fully believe that. And you look at the situation he was in. He didn't practice at all after hurting himself early in training camp. Didn't play any of the preseason games. And so you're sitting in a scenario where you put him in there and put him in a bad situation. And Andy Reid said as much, and I think that that's a great thing for him to do. Does it excuse him dropping the passes he did? No. But the other one that you're talking about in Richie James, that's a great point too. Because if you go back and look, Richie James had a great first game, but then he really wasn't used in game 2 and 3. And at that point, how much do you get out of the feel of being in the offense? Playing in the game and doing things at game speed are different than practice.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think some of the younger guys are coming up with that with Justin Ross, Rashee Rice, who's making a nice transition so far, at least for one ball game. I disagree with people that are concerned about Sky Moore in terms of him not being able to perform. I think, honestly, the situation we saw unfold around last week's game was just so unique in how late Travis Kelce was out of that ball game. I don't think Sky Moore was necessarily supposed to be part of it as a huge part of the game plan to begin with.
And I will say this. I know we're talking about wide receivers, but Kelce, you can't talk about pass catching for the Chiefs without talking about Travis Kelce. So he's going to affect the wide receiver room. He's going to affect the wide receiver routes, and he's going to affect the scheme just because of the type of player he is and how much defenses have to look at him. So when you start taking that away from the Chiefs offense, it changes how things are going to work on the field. And I will say this, one of the plays early in I believe it was the second quarter, Mahomes is looking downfield. Sky Moore comes wide open, and I think he looks like he's looking at him. And Mahomes hesitates and doesn't throw it until Sky Moore is behind the linebacker. And then he has to throw it high, and Moore isn't able to come down with a catch. There just wasn't the chemistry there that you would expect to see. And I think that's one of the bigger problems.
Just got confirmation as we were talking about Chris Jones at the top of the show. Ari Myrav, who does work for 33rd team, did confirm roughly 3.6. So we were right about the same area in terms of the total loss in Chris Jones coming up to this. Sorry, not to distract you. I just wanted to get that out as we're live right now, folks. Like, sub, hit that bell, please. That said, Kadarius Toney's not the only problem, and I do think he's not the only solution. I do think they have to go back to feeding him, but I do think what you want to start with is a nice steady diet of MVS, Justin Watson, stack formations, bunches, whatever you can do to utilize those guys that have a steady factor to them.
There is a lot of questions, and there's people that are questioning in the chat, and I think it's a valid point and a valid question. Is having so many wide receivers and weapons possibly going to cause issues, because you don't get guys that are going to be in rhythm from running routes on a regular basis? You don't see the same snap counts that some of these guys are used to getting. And one thing I will say, one thing that really stood out to me is you have MVS that had 2 catches on 2 targets, but he was only targeted twice. 100% catch rate, only targeted twice. And one of his catches was phenomenal, and it was a type of catch that you wouldn't expect him to make. And it was great to see, but there's a lot of questions, and it just seems to me, going back and watching some of that game, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And I know a lot of people aren't going to like this answer, but part of the reality is, as well, you game plan for a game for 3 months, or however many months that they game plan for that game prior to playing the Detroit Lions. And then probably one of your biggest pieces of your game plan is out 48 hours before you play. You put in all this stuff figuring you're going to run this against the Detroit Lions, and then you don't have your best player at, the wide receiver position, really, because that's really what he plays.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And to that point, let me just share with everybody how it ended up working out. Let me see if I can blow this up just a little bit here for you, make that even. As you see here, this is where I'm not terribly concerned about the target share. It's in these drives. You look at these and what happened because of the offense and because of the lack of Travis moving the chains. Only one drive where they went over 10 plays. Most of them, 1, 2, 3, 4 times. Nope, 3 times they went 3 and out. They had a 4-play drive. They had a 5. They had a 6. I think that also limits the number of targets. So you're absolutely right about the catch percentage. Justin Ross was also 100% reception percentage on the game as well. So I do think there'll be more opportunities to throw the ball more and have more targets spread around a little bit. So let's see how they do this week and see if that doesn't take care of itself.
Yeah, and if Travis Kelce plays this week, which signs are pointing towards him playing, he was supposed to run today. I did not see any updates on to how that went and whether or not I guess we'll probably find out maybe tomorrow if it comes out, if he had swelling in his knee from running. If he did, maybe he's not back this weekend. Then you're still trying to figure out what you're going to do with the wide receiver position. We can be hopeful he is back this weekend and they can move on and go with that direction. This is going to be a very tough test against the Jaguars. They have a fantastic offense. That was a interesting game to watch on Sunday.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how it comes and honestly what they can get from Chris. We're going to get Matt Derrick's perspective. He's back with us tomorrow from inside the facility. Whatever we can glean from the insider, we are going to do. You can check him out with us tomorrow. We'll also cover any details as they're released of Chris Jones' numbers and what that impact is. I know a lot of questions about who could they sign. Is there another guy out there? It all depends on what this dollar load is left on the cap. And one last question from Whiskey. Any concern that KC had to include a no-clause tag? That's the big question.
Huge.
Yeah,
Huge
we
concern.
have no idea at this point. That would be job number 1 for tomorrow. But make sure that you're with us. If you want on the sub text line, go get in that. That's 816-357-8781. Chris put out an alert as soon as we found out about Chris Jones. You saw the instant lockdown nows, we call them, little shorts that we put out here on the channel. We each did one just to make sure that we had the topic covered. So you can get that by subbing to the channel. You can get all the information and all the shows if you sub over at Spotify or Apple or any of those. I'm going to be live later at 7 p.m. Central over on RGR Football. Make sure you check that out as well. We'll be back with you tomorrow as we are every single day. We appreciate you spending your time with us tonight. I hope that you're excited about Chris Jones's return. We certainly are. And we'll have as much detail as we possibly can as soon as we can. Thanks for spending your time with us today. We'll talk to you tomorrow.